Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Kirsty again for Rewylding the Feminine, interviews with the women I love and the work that they do to serve in the healing arts. And today I have my dear friend, Irina Sells, and she does ancestral blessings, invoking family constellation, systemic ritual, earth-based ceremonies. So that was a big, long, I pushed it together. But I'm excited to talk with Irina today about working with our ancestors and ancestor medicine and how we can use ritual to help support the healing process and what or how that might look. So Irina, do you want to say anything about how you got introduced to constellation therapy and ancestral medicine and what I guess drew you to the work?
Yes, hi Kirsty. That's really nice offering to be here and to share with you what became a really a passion of mine. We met through massage and you being an amazing teacher and going
Yeah.
through that path. But I have to say that I did some family constellation in Europe when I was living there. But to tell you the truth, it was more related, I would say, to family systemic and family constellation per se of, okay, things that were not that working really in the systemic aspect or dynamic of a family. And really the ancestral work was when I moved to New Mexico, strangely enough, I realized that I was more drawn to this land than my homeland. And I felt so much more home here, belonging here than my homeland. And that really brought me into, working with ceremony, getting to know a little better the Native American ways to look at things, and also the South Americans ways or way to do ceremony. But for about 10 years or 9 years, I really didn't want to go back to Belgium. And there was like this place of like, it's so dark over there for me. I mean, there is something that I don't understand. I mean, it's like, why am I saying I hate my country? It's like it's a really strong word. It's not something that you say lightly to say I hate my country. And it's really interesting. It's finally doing some ancestral work that I realized how much there were things related to maybe things even bigger than my own family, but things that Belgium hadn't looked at, or genocides of the Belgian people towards the Congo and things like that. And those showed up into different constellation and ancestral work that I did. And it were like really, it's not where I started. I never expected that were things that were in my field, even though I knew my grandparents lived in the Congo, and I knew that there was a relationship there. My great grandmother died there. But when I started my constellation work, I remember that particular one. It was more about physical issues that I was dealing with. And I had like really a heart issue. I was exhausted and excessively exhausted. And I was like, why am I so exhausted? And it was interesting because my father passed away because of a heart attack. My grandfather passed away with a heart attack, and my mother had a heart attack last year or 3 years ago. So I was looking into the patterns of repetition and seeing into that. And while doing that particular constellation on the heart, and why am I so tired? We finally just like really ended up into the field of the genocide in Congo and of my family being able to look at that and by giving respect or honoring the ones that I have passed or the acts of a country, um, there was some resolution for me in the physical body, in my physical body.
Right.
It was a big thing for me to look upon that. And then I did another constellation, and that was about that kind of same emphasis and same importance for me. And suddenly I was like, okay, I'm attracted again to look upon my ancestor and where I'm coming from. What is my medicine? What is my roots really? And it's true that it's like going to Bolivia and doing ceremony there. That one day I was like, um, I felt terrible as a white person, and feeling like, you know, the misery of us having been colonized and having colonized so much. And it was in Bolivia that I realized, I say, but in fact, the first genocide really was the woman in Europe, or, you know, our ancestor really. And it's only when I arrived there in Bolivia that I was like, oh my God, but my ancestor, my real medicine woman lineage, or all the witches that are beyond us,
Right.
uh, were the ones that was probably the first genocide, you know, or the first that disappear. And uh, I really started to reopen that door of the ancestral work or the family constellation, in the ability to say, okay, yeah, there was, you know, a blood lineage that I have to look at and work with. But
Right.
it's, you know, there is the family dynamic, and then there is the blood lineage that we remember, and then there is the bigger field of the ancestors. Um,
It's complicated, isn't it? Because you, what I heard you saying is like you were having physical symptoms in your body that were really arising. And when you started to try to look at yourself to heal, it led you down the ancestral path. Like you were actually embodying something that had been passed on for generations, right? And
yeah,
how do we heal this then? I mean,
yeah, and you know, that's what I have been kind of working with, in particular family constellation. Even though I'll explain a little more, but I'm also working with systemic ritual. And it's true that often, we don't know necessarily what is behind, you know, our pains or our wounds. I mean, we do know indeed our family, systemic, and often our, um, patterns in the family dynamics. But sometimes it belongs indeed to ancestors that we have even no clue. I mean, we don't know their names, we don't know where they're coming from. And
mm,
so it's really when we work into the field, and what we call the knowing field, and having people representing, um, that we're able to tap in this incredible knowing field where somehow everyone or anyone can really download information, as long as they're really like into the moment, into the just feeling and felt sense of like
mm,
what is going on, or, you know. And sometimes things are just arising suddenly. It's like, you know, I feel that I don't like this person, or like I'm in this, I want to be away, or I feel I don't want to be in this room, or I feel this terrible emotion, or you see things, or you, and it's then it becomes really like, I would say, like a choreography of 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 the images that arise, and how to find the best way to have it flow. But when I say to have it flow, is like bring back what we call the flow of life, or the orders of love.
mm,
um, so that any person that would be in the field of the ancestor, that has been unseen, or that has been pushed away, or hasn't been recognized, and that can be, you know, someone that's suicide himself, that can be through a divorce, that can be through a war, that can be, many ways that someone in the family has been ostracized,
mm.
or like, okay, someone died in the family, a young kid, and no one ever talks about it for generation and generation. And then suddenly, in general, it's like it passed almost 2 generations to show up, and and by loyalty to those members that we don't even know at an unconscious level, we
Mhm.
may start carrying their burden, or we may start carrying their guilt, or we may start carrying, things that doesn't belong to us, and that either manifest in our life or manifest in our bodies.
Yeah. Well, I heard you, like you mentioned suicide, and there's a couple things I want to jump back to that in a second, but also that it's not just about our own healing. It seems like it's about a collective healing as well. Like you're really bringing a lot of different pieces and elements in, and I've experienced the family constellation, so I don't know that everybody who might listen to this has any idea.
Sure.
It's so different. I mean, but we can maybe talk about details a little bit if it comes up. But um, yeah, because I know, like, for example, my grandmother's father committed suicide during the Depression. And I don't know anything about it. Like, I really don't, he might have been maybe in his early 40s, but it's not talked about in the lineage of my family what happened. And she was, I think, about 18 years old when that occurred. And, we're now kind of, it's interesting because it's almost 100 years later, not quite,
Mm-hmm.
but it's similar times with the recession that's going on in the economy around the COVID kind of pandemic crisis. And it
Yeah.
really just strikes me that there's a cycle that's happening that's like bigger.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm doing some constellation with groups and collectives right now,
Hmm.
of course, with the notion of the pandemic. And
Hmm.
we were just talking about that somehow it brings even more so whatever has been shown in other pandemics or in other time in history, our collective trauma, because they're collective trauma. So our ancestors have had those trauma, and so there is a resonance, even though at a would say unconscious cellular level, there is a resonance for us, especially if things haven't been processed or if things haven't never been talked about. So there may be things resurfacing and showing up, especially in this time, like shadow parts of ourselves that belongs partly to us, but also that do belongs to our ancestors. Um, yes.
Yeah, it's very powerful. So, how do you work with somebody like when you're working with, because I guess there's two forms, right? There's the individual that you can work with somebody individually on it, and then you can also work with a group. So let's start maybe with individual first. What does a session look like when we're working with somebody on in this realm?
So even in a one-on-one session, I realized that they're almost quite different. But in general, what I like about the aspect of the family constellation is like there will be a long intake of kind of like figuring out what is going on for that person. But instead of looking really at the problem, it's like saying, okay, I have noticed that there is this kind of pattern in my life, maybe, a financial issue. It's like, I don't know why I never find a job, or I have really hard time, not spending, or it can be that kind of thing, or it can be a physical issue and saying, I'm stuck in chronic pain and I don't know how to get, why is that? I've follow many paths, in the
Mhm.
alternative or like Western medicine, whatever, but I feel I'm stuck in this problem. So according to what the person will relate to me, I will kind of like also try to understand their family and how far they have information. So do they have information about their grandparents, or like your grandmother or great grandmother, and see if there was anything particular in the lineage that may have caused a form of how do you say, when the flow of love is cut because
Mhm.
there was an issue or problem, something like that. So I would kind of gather that type of information. And then I personally do work with stones. So I will take stones and ask the person to place them into the space. And there is one stone for themselves and then one stone for whomever I will consider that it's important to start with. And then we just like go into the field and just see what emerged and what brings um, understanding and knowledge. Sometimes it's just even the awareness of looking at something that shows up. It's words that can be shared. And then there is also a big part of what we call the healing sentence or healing phrase, where there is really that sense of giving respect, honoring who is showing up or what is showing up really, and and giving those sometimes it can be really simple. It's like, I see you, just as simple as that. But suddenly having someone seeing the person that has always been unseen in the family or in the family pattern can be really extremely powerful. But it was funny, a few days ago, I was representing in a constellation, and we arrived at a point where even though we were doing this kind of movement of like the person and the mother and saying, okay, I see you, or I love you, or sorry, I wasn't able to be present for you at that time, or things like that. Um, there was anger from the person that was receiving that. And it was like, not all reconciliation can happen.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's also important to see the anger, and to see, that there is things that are showing up, and right now there is no point of forcing anything. So in a constellation, you will be aware. Suddenly there will be awareness that comes forth. Sometimes it will go to 1, 2, 3 generation further down, and sometimes you will be able to pass back the burden that some of the ancestor had, and that it's not yours to carry. And so there is really that sense of like, I'm giving you back something that I have been carrying for you that, doesn't belong to me. And so that recognition of like saying, I did that for you unconsciously, but now I'm just giving it back. And so there is those kind of movement.
That's almost like just what it's like. You've been carrying around a big satchel, like Santa Claus's or Saint Nicholas bag, and then you're like, oh no, I don't need to do this anymore. Here, you can have that back.
Yeah. And so, yeah, in a one-on-one, we will work through that things. And there is always a moment where there is closure. I mean, you really feel that the information in the field has been showing what it needs, that the movement of, we call it the movement of the soul. So it's even though you may have issue with your father and never talk to him your whole life, suddenly in the context of a family constellation, you would be able to say things on both levels. I mean, he would, and the person representing the father and the person being the client can say things at a soul level that can be really healing, and that can not happen really in real life. But often, because it happened at that soul level, there will be an unfolding, or there may be something that really shows up into the reality, into the field. And that's things that has been seen with constellation, with Bertelinger. We created that when we do the healing at that soul level, it really ripple off for you, for your generation to come, for your ancestor, and for your family dynamics.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like repairing a web almost, right? The
I
feel.
love that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then that we're like, yeah, repairing that web. And I like how you brought forth too that it's from love. It's not, even though other emotions come up, it's really about repairing where the flow of love has stopped.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. I was always curious too about um, I guess maybe because you know that, I mean, I grew up in Mons because of the military family. My father was stationed at NATO, but that this work, it comes out of Germany, and it's post the World War, and I feel like a lot of it is out of like the collective trauma that happened in Europe, right? And I don't know if you want to speak to that at all, because I don't know that everybody, especially Americans, I don't think they understand. They don't have the same firsthand experience of how World War One and really impacted the landscape. Because I know when I was in Griffey a couple of years ago with my daughter, and they were talking about how the German troops came across and got stuck on one of the bridges, in one of the particular areas. I mean, it's an oral tradition still of the impact of war on the land and the people.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think in the work that I'm doing with the systemic ritual, the teacher that I have is Jewish, and but working a lot in Germany, and so he does a lot of systemic ritual over there. And systemic ritual, he always say that somehow um, is like the father is the family constellation and the mother is shamanism, and so he brought the two together. And so when he does work, he works with big groups, and so he would work with victim and perpetrator and bring that a lot. And so he did a lot of work with the perpetrator being German and the Jewish, because the healing needs to happen on both sides as much. You know, there has been so much guilt that was carried by people my generation or earlier, or even the further ones, that were like, okay, in my lineage there were some Nazi. How do I walk forward in my life knowing that, you know, and or either I'm in total denial, or either I have to work with that, or, you know, so there's been so much, I say, silence about it for so long, especially in Germany. And but for the rest of the other European countries, I remember that the first constellation that I was doing in Europe, almost everyone had a great a father or a grandfather that was in the war, that had, you know, so it feels like that all the men had somehow a trauma with the war. And again, that guilt feeling of having been involved with that, or the horror that I had seen and things like that, it has been in almost every single family. My parents were both 3 years old when the war happened, so they were like really toddlers more than anything. But I'm sure it has affected them and their way to grow up. And they flew Belgium, to try to go to France and things like that. So everyone has a memory somehow in their family. Um, so
Well,
it
it's the
for sure
same.
that's a huge impact for us.
Yeah. Well, and I think I think for me too, I mean, just, you know, my father was in Vietnam, and every male until my generation, so I have a brother and male cousins who were not in the military, but it's the first time.
Mm.
But when you go back in history, every uncle and grandfather served one war or something, and that constant impact of that passed on is a family. To me, it's a family trauma. I mean, the whole family carries the impact, the silence of whatever happened that wasn't talked about overseas, or how it affects the family. So I think that family constellation therapy and the ancestral work is really imperative to healing that, as you know, as a family.
And funnily enough, it's not something that Bertelinger talks a lot about it, but he was in the army. I mean, as a young, he was probably 18 years old when, you know, with the war. So he was in the army. So yeah, I think, you know, that's bringing this work in Germany and to heal all the ancestral impact of the war was really important. It still is. Um, and sometimes I have the feeling that, of course, that's about Europe, but same thing here. I mean,
Yeah, well, that's what I'm pointing that out. I'm bridging it because I feel like, having grown up over in Europe, but then also over here, but seeing so many similarities and the impact it's had on the families themselves.
yeah.
Um, yeah, I just think it's really powerful. So I'm curious about now. So we kind of tied it to that level, but then you did the work in Bolivia, and I know you've done a lot of work in studying indigenous healing rites. How that comes forth, because I know you've been working on.
You know, it's because in the work with family constellation, it's true that we will not force anything, and we will just like bring um, whatever the fields bring, and then, like, you know, find those what I call movement of the soul, and finding the orders of love. But to me personally, I like to add a part which is more the ceremonial aspect, and also like working with altars for our ancestor, or like, you know, like when we calling in the ancestor at the beginning of a constellation. For me, I like to bring it bigger, because there is, yes, our blood ancestors, but I'm working on the land here. I'm working on this incredible land who has so much wisdom and guidance and the history of the native people, and also the Hispanic people. And there is so much history in the land itself, so that I don't want to totally dismiss that, because I think that in order to work our ancestors, somehow we have to be as respectful and honoring to the ones that are around us, as spirits, or, you know, they are around us all the time, and working with the earth is important to me. So when it's also when I, you know, there is sometimes in constellation and where we will see because in general we work only with the clients per se, but
Mhm.
sometimes there is ancestors that are not well, I would say not yet well in their place. I mean, they're dead, but they're not has been totally fully recognized. And in a constellation, sometimes you can have like 4 or 5 different place where you need to put your attention. And so for me, sometimes there is a need for a little more support for some ancestors that may be in limbos, maybe, you know, especially if in case of suicide or things like that, that may need a little ceremony, may need something that gives them more than just I see you, but that really by acting or by honoring them in doing some offerings, and it can be anything. You know, I like sometimes the sweetness of honey, but it can be, you know, it can be sage, um, it can be singing, it can be many different ways. And sometimes I would just suggest someone to bring that home with them and to find a picture of that ancestor or to find something that symbolizes that person and to light a candle for them and to really work with suddenly the person that did show up and that is in need of healing too. So I think it's kind of like a duo, like between
Uh,
the person and um, yeah. So I'm kind of like working with what I have learned, and also because I call it more earth based because it's more what comes first than really using one indigenous way to do things. I think I don't belong necessarily to Native Americans. It's not my ancestry, but we all belong to the earth and you know, calling the direction, calling the spirits of the land, calling the spirits of the the animals and different things. We all have that in our ancestral lines in a certain way. So I like not to be denominational, or did you say that?
yeah, 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 yeah.
uh,
You're not. Yeah, it's more intrafaith.
yeah.
Yeah, you pull, but you're pulling on the earth base. I mean, you know, like in Bali, it's Hindu animism, so
Yeah.
it's animistic is the earth base, right? So, yeah, when we're drawing on that earth base energy to
Mm-hmm.
or messages, healing, and working with those elements. So, yeah, I think
Mm-hmm.
it's really powerful
Yeah.
work.
Yeah.
And you work with song too, correct?
Mhm.
Yeah, you work with songs like the voice and
Yes.
singing as well. Do you bring that into the ancestral ritual?
It's coming more and more.
Yeah, yeah,
I I realize that I am definitely an introvert and shy.
yeah.
So in general, when I was bringing the voice, it was more by myself when I would be on the land. And it's strangely enough, I've been often called to offer prayers or ceremony or songs in place where there was massacres,
Mm,
and I didn't know at first, but it was like more and more places were like calling me and saying you have you know, to come and to just like through the song kind of release um, the lost soul, or it felt like. So it was not really specific. I didn't know those souls or those ancestors, but it felt that the song is a big way for me um, to sing the grief
mm,
and to, yeah, to move the grief or to move the energies from the density of this world where sometimes some souls are stuck to more the light.
yeah,
And so I'm starting to bring that in a one-on-one, and but I haven't really done that in the group ones yet.
yeah. So we talked about a little bit about
Yeah.
you work with the stones, and I do. So I just what my little exposure is when somebody asked me what the family constellation therapy was like. I said it's a little bit like um, sweat lodge meets seance meets group dynamics meets psychodynamic therapy or something is like the words that I found myself saying, but it's nonverbal, right? I mean, it's a lot of the work is in movement and motion. And then what I really liked about when working with the larger group was it just felt like the field, if you will, was really well contained and supported when people have trained in the work, and that more could get fixed or repaired in that web, the field,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, the group is beautiful too. I realize, that the one-on-one becomes something that it's not fully constellation anymore. It becomes kind of a, with what I have seen and experienced in a one-on-one, it becomes this healing of itself. It has this own tone. But with the group, I'm a little more into the family constellation tradition, I would say. Um, and yes, I think there is so much power in bringing in so many people in the field and being able to really have those people representing the different layers of ancestral beings, I would say.
Yeah.
And in general, you would have your direct family into the constellation, often either the father or the mother, and then when we start, often we start small. We start with one or two people, like one person, and then one or two family member, and then things adds up. The more we feel like, okay, we need one more representing, one more person representing, and sometimes, you can be representing a larger group of ancestors. That the difficult part for certain people is it's like it's so much not in the head that not all it doesn't always make sense.
Mhm.
But it's being able to really tap in the know and the listening and the felt sense and seeing that the movement brings healing. um, but sometimes it's like you cannot totally understand all the interaction of things, or like you would like to know which is this group of ancestors and how far they are. Our mind kind of cling on like where they where they were in my line. But
Yeah.
sometimes
Well,
it's trusting that it's that in the knowing field is a healing at a soul level that happens and that will ripple in our daily life. And
right.
I've learned that, but it's true that sometimes people are a little, um, yeah, wondering what it is all.
Well, I think it would be scary if somebody wasn't already in the healing arts and hadn't been doing work and that was their first exposure to the work. I mean, I could really see how working with you one-on-one would be more safe as a container to start getting
Yeah.
opening up to the concepts and the ideas, as opposed to working with the village, if you will,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
To heal.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've seen that. I mean, I know people that do not want to be in the group, do not want to be sharing that or feeling vulnerable, or and so the one-on-one is really
Hmm.
a sweet way to approach it and have a change.
So you mentioned something too, that you have something new coming up, the inner landscapes. You want to talk about that a little bit? What's more?
Yeah.
Yeah, what's that about?
uh, it's been the, the COVID-19 emergence. No, of course, we end up being massage therapists locked down at home and not being able to touch anymore. And we decided to trade with some other colleagues, and but distance healing. And yes, of course, I've always heard about distant Reiki and things like that. I'm not I mean, I did some Reiki, but I'm not necessarily the person that would say I'm a Reiki master. But I said, oh, let me try, just for the beginning of it. And so I really started with the principle of doing, okay, working with the chakra and Reiki and working distant healing. And what has been showing up in the past 3 weeks was like really um, when I was starting to tap into that, how bigger this became. Maybe because suddenly I was alone in my healing room, and that I was suddenly able to bring a song or like bring smudging or bring other tools that I had that I wouldn't do in the context of a spa environment or like in my massage practice, because that was, or that would not be the expectation of the person on the table. So suddenly I felt this huge freedom to really tap into what is possible and what is coming forth. And it's been really, really beautiful. Even like amazing how you can do craniosacral at distance. I mean, just tapping, you know, and when I'm in the room, suddenly it feels like the person is there the same way that it would be on my table. And receiving the feedback of the people that I worked with was I would say as powerful as if they were in the room with me. And I have to say that for me it was a new discovery, but also what showed up was like I worked with Crystal on the floor for the chakra. I was like suddenly things were inviting themselves into the field.
Mm.
And by the end of the time that I worked, I looked at the ground and it becomes this really beautiful piece of art. And it felt like that's why I call it inner landscape, because what showed up was not anymore just those seven chakra in crystal, but suddenly this really landscape that felt like this inner landscape of people showing up. And yeah, when I say inner, it's because I think somehow it's inner and bigger. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's not the body anymore. It's energetic, but it's also at the soul level, and it felt like it it brought something totally new to me, um, and tapping into this. Finally realizing, bringing forth all the healing gifts that I had that maybe were not fully embraced when you're constrained to expectation, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Um, or
So when you were doing those sessions, were you doing it like this on Zoom or something and
no.
working with somebody, or no, did somebody ask you to work on them?
So what I do is like I had to ask people if they were willing to receive. And so I call them, I say, I'm starting, I'm just doing a little intake. I'm saying I'm starting, and then I'll call them back after the session is over. And
Okay.
and then we exchange and see. But it wasn't, what is interesting is like it has brought change, as physical change as well as really deep behavioral change to certain people, which were
Mm.
like saying, wow, suddenly I'm doing things that I didn't permit myself for all my life. Or people saying suddenly, I had a back pain in my back for for years and it disappeared. And so yeah, it's been interesting that we can go beyond, our physical bodies and work at a totally different level.
So when you're talking with that client, I'm so I can make sure I understand it, is do they sit or do they lay down
they
during
lay
um,
they lay down.
they lay
They're
down
in a
while you're doing the
receiving
session?
mode. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. So they're receiving, and
yeah,
then they're tuned into listening to the field at some level, then and then you're
yeah,
doing the work, whatever that looks like, and
yeah,
then you guys check in at the end of the session.
yeah.
Okay. Okay, gotcha.
And what I realize is it's been different for every single person. Um, so and people in general necessarily came with physical issues, but came back after and saying, oh, this changed physically. So it was not their focus or intent per se, and it wasn't necessarily mine either on working with them, but often the change happened at a physical level too.
Well, it's really interesting that the fact that, we've all had to close our practices, and that this level of creativity in the healing arts is like, well, we're finding other ways to continue to do the work we do anyways. And
Yeah,
and that we don't need to be physically present with our clients necessarily.
yeah. I, yeah, no, and doing the constellation online, I never thought that with technology you could tap into the knowing field, being in all different places in the world, and being in that energetic field still. and it does work, and I'm fascinated by that. I do believe also that, especially right now in this like last week, or not week, but months, it's like things are going so much faster at an energetical level. And so it feels like somehow we're able to maybe tap or change things differently than we were before. I don't know. It feels things are really speeding up.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've always been, I'm always interested in this kind of work too, and it really strikes me. I've heard a lot of different people who do kind of collective healing and working with healing collective trauma, and just how we can do that through ritual in different places. And I just think it's really it's fascinating to me to see it getting amped up in a different way that people maybe don't realize that, and that's part of, to me, rewilding the feminine is, reclaiming those ancestral roots and letting them be healed, as opposed, and the more I research my own ancestry, and that was part of my journey of going back to Scotland last year, was probably semi crazy, because I gave myself a hard journey, because I went out into the wilds literally, and I was mountain biking, but it was way beyond my capability. And we were I was talking with my partner, and we were talking about how it's so different to be in the wild, like when you're doing some kind of work. But it was a reclamation for me to take back something that got taken away by colonization, because the British colonized Scotland and tried to take away the Gaelic rites and the Celtic rites and ceremony. And I think a lot of people left those ancestral lands to have the freedom to practice their shamanic rituals and things that got passed on. So for me, that's like a big piece of this as well. And of course now, I mean, I'm kind of like, well, what do you call yourself? You're really multi-ethnic, when multiple generations come through. But that lineage really speaks to me, and how that comes forth.
Yeah, no,
And it's
totally.
very earth-based, and and it's very feminine.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah,
a
no, totally.
patriarchal lineage, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. No, for me in the past months, they've been coming forth so strongly. Um, all those medicine women and that may have had to disappear because of the world where they were not accepted, and where their wisdom and their medicine and their healing capacity were just shut down. But it feels, I mean, right now for me it feels that something is really breaking forth, and or breaking through, or there is the veil of of uh, of something that had shut that down so deeply, that is just like cracking through the earth, and cracking to the psyche even of many women. It feels that somehow everyone is in this place of like reclaiming yourself, connect with your higher self, connect with this medicine that you have, or that we, I think, all have as gifts in many different expressions. But so I think it really feels like it's time for all of us to really step into those gifts, and being fully present to what I was showing.
yeah, well, it's interesting to me too, because I think the ancestral work, what one of the pieces, maybe we didn't really talk about it so much, is grief, right? Because if we don't grieve our ancestors, then we don't have the opportunity to have them heal either. And I think a lot of times things were just kind of under the rug, so to speak.
Sure.
Like, well, we don't talk about that. So, and that seems like that collective grieving, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
in honoring, which is a form of praise, offers an opportunity for us to heal that.
Totally.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh.
It's so awesome. This is fun to talk about this stuff. I'm doing these talks because I feel like this is stuff that's kept, well, I don't feel like it's talked about out in the open very often. Like
Yeah, sometimes you have the feeling that it's because you're only into that world. So sometimes you have the feeling that it's your reality or that it's reality. And then you realize, oh, no, not at all. um, but yeah, it's because you're friends or you're close acquaintance are involved in it, because that's the people you see. Um, but it's true that I do believe that, I mean, looking around, that there is more and more awareness to the ancestral healing aspect. I mean, I'm seeing that that there is a movement for that in the US, but with many different forms. I mean, it's called ancestral wisdom, or ancestral awakening, or ancestral healing, but there is really like a emergence of that. And I like the fact that it's not only through constellation. I mean, there is many ways to look at it. But so I think there is really like a desire, or like a prise de conscience, awareness of people that, like, if we do heal our ancestor, then I think everyone will be able to move forward in a more free and fluid way.
Mm. Nice.
Yeah. And I think there is our ancestor, but I see, you know, and that's why I was saying, I think that around us, in the place where we live, there is also place still, like what we call the suffering dead, that sometimes needs some release. And that it's nice, you know, to go on the land and feel it, and sing to the land or sing to them.
Yeah, and it's not just reserved for the human form, right? It's
Mhm.
animal spirits, all the elements.
Totally. I mean, the grieving of Mother Earth, it's a big one too. You know, that's for sure. Um, and for nature, and for the species that have disappeared and that are disappearing. I mean, there is a lot of grieving, so that's true that um, I think as a collective, and that's where I'm working with different collective right now. We're really working to tap into that grief, and to try to bring it forward. I mean, to light it up, or to, you know, release that grief um, at a collective level.
Yeah. Well, I think that's important. And I think that the collective consciousness, I mean, we can't do everything in isolation. So we need to have each other as well. And then the healing arts. And if we can be working together with multiple people, then it's sort of like that vibration, if you will, gets amplified.
Definitely, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for me, it's like, you know, the more we work on ourselves, and you know that you've been working on yourself. I mean, it's the healing journey of wholeness, from personal trauma to physical issues, to wholeness as being. Really allow everyone else to, I don't know, the more we bring ourselves into this world, the more we're able to bring our hand to a friend of us, or to anyone that we're working with, and say, come with me, come with me. You know, you're there too, and we can all walk forward and to our own gifts, I think.
Yeah. I think that's really powerful to, well, I mean, I'm always interested too that we do it together, like with, like, as a practitioner and client, it's, we're not really separate from them. And I don't know that that might scare clients a little bit if we were honest about that, like in session,
Mm-hmm.
how much that we get into, like, feel what's going on in their lives so that we can help them find more sense of wholeness, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
even in the touch therapy world. I mean, we really with people all the time, and then yeah, it's very interesting that way.
That's why for me it was kind of really strange um, to be, you know, we cannot work anymore, we cannot touch anymore, and it's like, how are we going to be in that intimacy with our clients, and doing that distant healing, and feeling it's exactly the same. For
Mm.
me, that's really really beautiful and sweet, and even feeling that somehow I'm tapping on another level, that somehow we're going even deeper than we stop, when we stop by the body, when we stop by the tissue, when we
Mhm.
stop by the pain, you know.
Mhm.
um, we're tapping in something different.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're ahead of me because I'm still teaching full time, and so I've had to switch gears, and so I'm teaching touch therapy classes online, which is really like a foreign concept. So, I mean, I'm definitely having to I'm getting stretched in a way to try to figure out how to still be of service in the other part of my life. I mean, my practice is closed right now, which is, I kind of just said, well, then I'm taking a little break. So I'm okay with that. But because I'm still teaching full time, I'm like, oh my goodness, how am I supposed to do this? This is a new platform
Yeah.
and way to try to teach touch therapy.
Yes.
It's tricky.
And I was wondering if how will people react when we coming back from this? Will they let themselves be touched again? I see so much fear, even just like going to stores or anything. I mean,
Yeah.
I thought that we were already a kind of touch deprived society, that we're like in a place where, teacher don't touch children anymore. You have to be careful of everything you're doing. And suddenly we're even more into that space of like touch is dangerous. And so
Yeah.
I'm really curious where as practitioner or like, definitely massage therapists, I don't know what's going to be for us in the coming year.
Mhm. Well, and I was talking with a colleague out of Santa Fe the other day, and we were just really talking about how passionate we are about touch and how touch is such a powerful form of healing. And we have generations growing up now with so much technology and not growing up holding hands, two children hanging out together, sleeping in the same bed, with safe, healthy forms of touch.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm seeing that in the field of teaching, where students don't really know what healthy touch is.
Mm-hmm.
So they confuse healthy touch with maybe negative touch or bad or triggery touch. So we have a lot of that kind of um, happening now, and it's um, a result of this technology and phones and iPhones, and people aren't getting playtime with touch,
No.
out on the just the playground. How important that is to have kids playing together and learning how to set boundaries and say no in the playground, but also how to give each other hugs and a bisou, and just having it be okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I think, something culturally that's getting lost. And we're at the age where we've had to live, we've grown up with TV, right? But computers really came on in our lifetime, so we're fluid with it, but it wasn't dominant in our childhood. There was still, like, we could play in the dirt in the woods, or we still had that, but some of the generations after us are not getting that time, unless the parents who are raising them are giving it to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
So we're going to need our field even more so, I think, going down. Well, that's my hope.
Yeah, no, yeah, there's those two aspects for me. It's like there will be either even more the need for it, uh, or they will, I don't know, or there will be people that will be in the fear zone and feel that touch is dangerous,
Yeah.
even more so.
Well, I mean, it's a dangerous platform to give into the fear.
Definitely.
Yeah, because you're giving up your power.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if people don't know if they don't know how to come from their center and ground, which is what I'm seeing too when I go to the store, just massive, almost fear and hysteria. But I mean, they're giving up their power.
Totally. Mm.
I mean, and they're giving their power up, and it's a right. We have a constitutional right to choose how we are right now, if we wear a mask or not, if we, want to protest. We're having some pretty powerful rights stripped
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because of this pandemic right
Yes.
now, that
Yes.
for me, I'm like, this isn't okay.
No.
Yeah.
No. Definitely not.
And there's another line, I don't want to necessarily go there in our
Yeah.
talk, but you know, it's can be quite scary. And I think people probably need to use more discernment is what I've been saying.
Yeah, no, totally. Totally.
And the flip side of this is what's interesting, what I'm noticing and some other people I talk to is those of us who grew up with trauma are doing okay in this
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
situation because we're used to dealing with this level of ambiguity, if you will. And yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
like, oh yeah, no problem.
Let me be the introvert that I am and stay at home and not feel guilty to not be
Yeah,
in the world.
yeah, it's like so easy. So funny.
Yeah, no, totally.
uh, do you have anything else you want to share about your work
Ah,
before we?
no, but it's, yeah, hoping. That's why I think I brought the notion of touch is like, because not knowing where we're going, it was like, okay, suddenly how do you navigate
Yeah,
to the future and saying, okay, the constellation is possible through a computer, and the distant healing work is possible through the ether. So it's finding new ways for the time being, because it's true that I don't know when I will be able to work again. And so it's, yeah, it's diving into other places of offering, but um, it's good too.
yeah. Well, I think what I was really hearing too is that inner landscape work has the same result. So it makes me kind of wonder. I mean, I believe in the physical touch too. I mean,
Of
by all
course.
means, but how much is it the physical touch and how much is it the field that we're holding
Yeah, totally.
with the client that
Yes.
we're working with? There's these other parameters then that we're working on, you know, and I don't talk about with my clients when I see their relatives or their lost loved ones coming in to the field into the practice, but that has happened to me my whole practice.
Yeah.
You know, I'm having side conversations with
Yeah,
their ancestors or their lost child or you know
definitely.
what has it, and it's a very powerful piece, but I've never been explicit with it
Yeah.
with my clients because I feel like often they're not ready for that.
Yeah, and that's the
Be
part,
wrong.
where maybe that's why I was saying suddenly being alone in my room, I felt that freedom of being able to tap in that field at so many different levels. And yes, I bring the touch
Yeah.
but I bring the whole picture, or I was able to bring the whole picture, or I am able to bring the whole picture, and there is not always the need to share everything. I do believe, sometimes it's pertinent, sometimes it's not, for the person to process things
Mhm.
intellectually. I mean, I think I trust, because I'm working so much with what I call the knowing field, or the field. I trust in that sometimes more than into bringing people back into their mind. And that's what we say in constellations. Like, often we don't want to talk about a constellation after, because it brings us back into our mind, and we feel that it's more necessary to work at a soul level.
That's beautiful. I like
Hmm.
that. Cool. I think this is a good place to stop. I like
Yes.
ending with the soul. So thank you so much, Adina.
Thank you so much,
And
Kirsty.